Well, hey there, guys. I'm Axel the Beast of ZeldaDungeon.net, and I want to talk to you about Majora's gender. This is another Majora's Mask Month video, and I had been considering this topic, except last video, in the comments, you guys complained about me referring to Majora as a he in the video. And that's kind of what settled it for me on actually doing this video. So you see, I do read the comments. I just probably should do it more. But, so, I'd like to go over this. Majora, in my opinion, is male. Now, this is a topic that is, to my surprise, kind of a big point of debate. A lot of people will talk about this, and they'll just... There's a lot of debate back and forth. Is he male? Is he female? Is he genderless? You know, for the record, he is a term that can be applied to just being genderless. It's sort of like the default pronoun or whatever. It's sort of the default there to use, and so when someone says Majora he, they're not necessarily meaning male, they could just mean it. I so don't think necessarily that people are always saying that he's male when they say that. I do, however, mean that pretty much. I think that Majora is male. I think there's more possibility that he is, there is some possibility that he is genderless. It is just a non-gender entity. But I do not think there is much chance of him being female. Now, before I get into the video, I will say I don't think him being female is impossible. It is still a possibility. I just don't think any of the evidence people put to him being female is conclusive at all. I don't think there's any proof whatsoever. Now, one of the things that people talk about is, of course, his voice. Now, I admit this is one of the most solid pieces of evidence, but I don't think it concludes anything. Majora, as when he talks in the final battle, well, not when he talks, when he utters noises during the battle, they're all really high-pitched. They're shrieky, high-pitched, and they sound, frankly, feminine. Now, there's a couple, obviously that suggests female. It's also used as a reason to think could be a child, because children have high-pitched voices. However, it doesn't necessarily, for certain, mean either. In fact, as I mentioned in the last video, as a defense for why the second form of Majora, Majora's Incarnation, where he acts all happy dancing around, is not childlike, is because Majora always had a jester theme. The colors of his design are jester-like. The whole theme, he's like a twisted, insane, chaotic, jester-like entity. And that's a continuation of what the childlike actions of his second form were like. But at the same time, this also means that the squeaky voice, or the high-pitched / feminine voice, makes sense because, well, frankly, that's the kind of voice people often give jester-like characters. They're at least high-pitched. And another thing is with the voice, is this is something to note that's important about the Japanese. Very often, especially in anime, the Japanese will make a villain who's male, but they will give him feminine traits. A male having these feminine traits is often by the Japanese in their culture ascribed as being something that the evil characters do. Possibly in some kind of intention to make the male, who's not supposed to necessarily act that way, narcissistic or in love with oneself, maybe. I don't know, that's just a random theory as to why they do that. But you'll also notice the Japanese, believe it or not, have accents like we do. We just don't notice because the Japanese language in itself sounds completely different to us. And there's kinds of accents that are supposed to be more feminine, and usually the villains use these accents. Another thing, again, talking not specifically about Japanese culture, but our culture in general, mostly American culture, or just, well, not necessarily American, just culture in general, okay, is that in fiction, and I don't know if this is sexist or not, I don't want to get into that, but it's just kind of how it is. In fiction, if a character is female, it's either obvious, I mean, they make it abundantly apparent and there's no question whatsoever, or it's stated. If there's any question of the character's gender, then either the character will be stated to be female or the character is male. Male is the default. Male characters are by default male. Now this makes sense because in real-world stories, there is no question of gender. But in fantasy type stories where there's an evil to fight, or there's just some kind of conflict, there will be more male characters because conflict is something applied to the male thing. It's supposed to be, at least. I'm not going to go into talking about what the genders do or do not do, or what traits they do not have, but at least what's considered is that the males are the stronger gender, and that they are, the ones that you'd have in a fight, in a conflict against good or evil or whatever. And in anime and stuff, the only kinds of stuff, places where there would be a question of the character's gender are cases where either they have exotic character designs so that for some reason it's harder to figure out what the character's gender is, or there's a reason the character needs to conceal their gender, like in, I don't know, anime or The Legend of Zelda, where Sheik is Zelda's disguise. So, point is that character by default male, and since Majora is ambiguous gender-wise, it's probably male. Granted, I believe Majora probably is some kind of demon or dark god, so genderless makes perfect sense, since what is gender, anyway? Gender really, that distinction really only exists, from what I can see, as one function, because there are unisex species that can still reproduce, for reproduction. That's the only reason there's a distinction there. There's no other purpose genders serve, really. So the fact that, why would a god reproduce? Gods don't have kids, they are just gods. So, basic same premise there. I believe that Majora is probably genderless, but I believe he is supposed to appear male or masculine. Most gods are depicted as having a gender function or avatar, incarnation. So, Majora, I humbly believe, is a very masculine entity. I mean, everything he does. First of all, his physical shape is masculine. Now, let's go into this real quick, actually. People talk about Majora's physical appearance, body, whatever, usually referring to the forms you fight him in at the end of the game. And Majora is often they often say that, the eyes on his chest are supposed to be certain female parts. And they've also talked about him having ovaries or whatever. And because you can see him because he's skinless. First of all, he's not skinless. His body is ornate. I thought that was obvious. Second of all, do you really think they'd be showing these female parts on a character who's not wearing clothing in a Nintendo game, in an E-rated game? Do you really think they'd squeeze that in? I mean, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I debunk that for the same reason I debunk the idea that Stone Tower Temple was supposed to have, phallic or obscene imagery. They just wouldn't do that in an E-rated game. That's not a possibility. People also talk about Majora's name being feminine. That's not necessarily a thing either, because there's a lot of, especially in Japan, there's a lot of case of using certain names as both male or female, whether they're masculine or feminine. There's a lot of that in Japan, so it's not really relevant to this discussion. Majora's appearance to me looks very masculine. He has muscles in his last form. And even if you're going to talk about the eye thing, that's clearly a form taken from the mask. The mask gradually turns into this, form that has a body, and it still keeps on the mask traits. I don't see how that's even a point of relevance. That just seems a silly comparison. Also, Majora has, in my opinion, a very masculine, just nature of how he acts. He wants to destroy the world with a complete exertion of power and causative suffering. Again, not to sound sexist, but in the form of stereotypes in modern culture, whether they're sexist or not, I'm not saying whether I approve of them or not, it tends to be that female characters, female villains specifically, are often driven by emotion, whereas male villains are driven by power-hungry stuff. And the female villains often have a more manipulative nature, and they'll actually manipulate power, which in a way actually makes a stronger villain. Whereas the male villains exert their own power. And that's what Majora does. Now, I'm not trying to sound sexist here. This is just observations I've made about popular culture, and basically rules of operation of popular culture. And Majora, following those rules, is strictly male, in my opinion. I can't think of a lot of other points to make about this. I just don't feel... I mean, again, it's totally possible that Majora is female. If it was a female villain, actually, that'd be pretty cool and interesting. And it would also go along with the Dark God thing, potentially, because it could be like an anti-goddess. Although being male could also function as the anti-goddess thing, and in a way, that would be the total opposite of being sexist. At least to females, it would still be sexist to males, because it would be the idea that the females are the good creators that protect everyone, and then the male is the destructive evil. Actually, that also goes along with at least accepted ideas of what the genders are, because the females are the mothers, the nurturers, whereas the male just works or destroys. Whatever. Bad example, but I think you're starting to see what I'm getting at. The traits that people associate with both genders can give you an idea of what Nintendo was probably trying to go with Majora. Again, Majora's probably could very easily be genderless and could still be female. I've just always believed he's male. And I'm not approving of nor denouncing any of the things I've said in this video. That's not the point. I'm just making observations. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. I want you guys to tell me in the comments, do you think Majora is male or female, genderless, or... You know what? I mean, I'm curious to see what the consensus is, because I always thought majority thought he was male, but, you know, discussions pop up on ZeldaDungeon.net forums frequently, fairly frequently, about this topic, and people, you know, claim that Majora is female a lot, and I've gotten into these debates. So I'm curious what the consensus is, so tell me in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.